What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. Today's video, we're going to talk questions from the fan mailbag from those commenters who commented on my last video heading into week 6. We're also going to talk 5 players to stash and 5 players to start among players that are less than 40% rostered who you can plug into your lineup last minute in week 6. If you followed this advice last week, you would have picked up Joe Flacco, who had a great game. You also would have picked up Trey Sermon and Tyrone Tracey, who also played very well last week too. So, we'll go ahead and get started with week 6. Out of town this week. Going to be going to an NFL game tomorrow. So if you can guess which one I'll be at, I'll give you a shout out in the next video and you get a free question answered. So, so take advantage of that if you can guess which game I'm at. All right. So this next, so what we're going to do first is we're going to start with quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and flex, just like we did last week. I'm going to pick 5 players to stash and 5 players to start. Stash means don't feel comfortable starting them, but feel comfortable having on my bench and for long-term upside or see what happens next week. So we'll get right into it. Among the quarterbacks, among the players that are less than 40% rostered, my stash player for week 6 is Bo Nix. Bo Nix has been a lot better the last 3 weeks of the season, and I do like the upside that he has on this team. Bo Nix has, for fantasy, not been a great quarterback necessarily. He's only had 11, 8, 19, 6, and 23 for the last 5 weeks. So not been a very consistent player that you want to start, especially in one quarterback leagues. But for 2 quarterback leagues or deep 1 quarterback leagues, I think this is a player that you definitely want to have on your roster. He's only 9% rostered in ESPN leagues. And Bo Nix has a nice playoff schedule as well. Additionally, he's a good mobile quarterback. You could see some more designed runs for him as the season goes along. He did have 8 rushes last week, only amounted for 9 yards, but I think that Las Vegas is a pretty solid defensive line. He gets some better matchups as the season goes along. He could have a good rushing floor for you too. But I especially like that playoff matchups schedule for Bo Nix. In week 15, he gets the Indianapolis Colts, which have been a terrible defense so far this season. And in week 17, he gets the Cincinnati Bengals, which is another defense that will be brought up multiple times today because they are terrible. And I think that this is a player that I do like his upside as the season goes along. And if you look at a lot of the great quarterbacks in NFL history, they didn't start off well in fantasy. They had some rough patches. I'm not by any means saying Bo Nix is going to be a great NFL quarterback, but I'm just saying that he's a very intriguing option for fantasy. And I think that he's definitely worth rostering. Should be much higher than just 9%. And then the player that I would start for this week among the quarterbacks, if he is out there, is Daniel Jones. And yes, Daniel Jones is a pretty disgusting option to put out there among quarterbacks if you're hurting. But if you have Patrick Mahomes on a bye, if you have Sam Darnold on a bye, something to that effect, Daniel Jones is a very solid 1-week option for you. He's only 25% rostered in ESPN leagues. Daniel Jones gets the Cincinnati Bengals this week, which have been a very poor defense this season. And I think Daniel Jones has done well this season when he's played poor defenses. He had 2 down weeks this season against the Minnesota Vikings and the Dallas Cowboys, which are both solid defensive lines, defensive fronts. So Daniel Jones really struggled in those games. But in games where he went up against mediocre to poor defenses against Washington, Cleveland, and Seattle, and Seattle by no means is a bad defense either. 18, 19, and 22 points. Daniel Jones also gives you a good rushing floor, much like Bo Nix. And they get Cincinnati this week, which has, you look at what Lamar Jackson just did, you look at what Jaden Daniels did a few weeks ago. I think that this is a very good matchup for Daniel Jones. And the week after that, he gets Philadelphia, which has not by any means been a stout defense either. So this is a very solid stream option for you that could turn into a multiple week play depending on how he does in this game. So really like Daniel Jones as somebody that you can pick up for this week. Honorable mentions that didn't quite make this list. Drake Maye is only 3.6% rostered. He gets Houston. This is definitely a stash, but a lot of times with these number 3 overall picks, it doesn't hurt to just stash him for a week and see what happens. I'm not expecting a good game, but then again, we've been surprised with some of these rookies. Drake Maye is somebody to just stash and see what happens for this weekend. Tua has been dropped in a lot of leagues as well, so keep an eye out for him. He's supposed to come back around week 8. And another very disgusting play that could actually be a good start for you in very deep leagues is Will Levis. And yes, Will Levis, is a pretty rough proposition to go out there against him, but he also gets the Colts this weekend. And Will Levis, if nothing else, is a very fearless quarterback. Probably have a few interceptions in this game, but also could have a good passing yard total that could help give him a solid floor. So it's not a bad option if you're in dire straits and need somebody to put out there. Running backs. So the number one stash running back for week 6 for me is Tyrone Tracey Jr. And I talked about him last week as well. He is not expected to start this week. It's expected to be Devin Singletary. But Tracey had an excellent game last week. He was 18 for 129, which is of the volume that you get there as a rookie is just incredible. A team like this, the Giants, which are not expected to be a very good team this year, they're going to probably hover around like 6 to 8 wins. I would not be surprised if they continue to give Tracey more reps as the season goes along. Devin Singletary is okay, but he definitely has a potential cap on him that you kind of know what you're going to get. But Tyrone Tracey could be something special that they could work with moving forward. And I see this team as they start getting into the range where the playoffs might be out of reach for them. They really could use Tracey. So this is a stash. It's only 25% rostered. But I do expect that he will have more involvement as the season goes along. And it could happen as early as this week too. But with Singletary there, I don't feel comfortable starting him in week 6. But a player that I would feel comfortable starting for this week is Antonio Gibson. They get the Houston Texans this week, but Ramondre Stevenson is out. I do suspect that the Patriots will be in situations where they need to pass the ball often. They're going to be down. And Antonio Gibson is a pretty good pass-catching running back. So I think for PPR leagues, I project that he will give you a solid floor. I'm not expecting a great game. I'm expecting somewhere around 10 to 15 points. But I do think that Antonio Gibson could give you a solid floor value, that it would be good situation for you to put him out there for this week. I think he could give you a solid spot start in place of Stevenson. Other guys to keep an eye out as well, and this player to me would shoot up this list as somebody that I would start if Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler don't play, is Jeremy McNichols. He has had 2 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, third-string running backs for the Washington Commanders, gets the Baltimore Ravens this week. If Robinson is out and if Eckler is banged up, McNichols could have a great game, and this would be something to monitor throughout the weekend. Right now, Robinson and Eckler are both still questionable, but this is something to definitely keep an eye out. And if McNichols is there, definitely somebody that you could throw in a spot start if those two are banged up and not playing. Braelon Allen gets Buffalo this week. He has had some good performances at time with Breece Hall there, and they get the 32nd rushing defense for this week. So Braelon Allen, expect the coaching staff to kind of change things up a little bit and get the running backs involved more. He could be a good spot start for you too. And then Justice Hill is somebody to keep an eye out as well. He is 29% rostered. He has been up and down, and he is involved in the passing game as that pass catching running back sometimes, but other times he's kind of a dud. But this could be an up week for him in a game where they expect him to be competitive with the Commanders, and probably need to throw it more in the third down situation. So it could be a good game for Hill, but very much a dark throw. And other guys, this is a little bit over 40%, but keep an eye out for Jalen Warren, because Najee Harris has not played well again. Now Cordero Patterson is banged up. Jalen Warren is getting healthy. Maybe Warren could start to get more involvement in this backfield too. So keep an eye out for that, because he's been dropped in a lot of leagues. It's about 44% available in ESPN. All right, so wide receivers for this week that I would stash is Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson is a second, third receiver for the Arizona Cardinals. He has had some solid fantasy performances this season. Michael Wilson, this past week especially, was pretty good. He had 5 for 78 on 6 targets and 12.8 points. That's nothing special necessarily, but if you're looking for somebody that could get more involvement as the season goes along, I like him for just his target count the last 3 weeks: 9, 7, and 6 targets. The upside plays in this offense are obviously Marvin Harrison and Trey McBride. So Michael Wilson, you probably don't have a high upside with him necessarily, but if you continue to see more target involvement like this, he could creep into that range of being a flex-worthy starter. So I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to stash him right now. He's currently only 14% available in ESPN leagues, so he's definitely still out there in a lot of places. Somebody to keep an eye on and see what happens against Green Bay, which is a defense that has allowed quite a bit of passing yards so far this season. So this could be a good opportunity to stash Michael Wilson, see what happens for this week. The starter that I like for this week, I'm going to keep with this Cincinnati Bengals poor defense theme, is Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton is a third-string receiver for the New York Giants, and Malik Neighbors is not going to play this week. So Darius Slayton, only 13.3% roster, gets the Cincinnati Bengals, which have been a sieve defense so far this season, as I've said. And Darius Slayton had a solid game last week against Seattle. He had 11 targets, 8 receptions, and 122 and a touchdown. I'm amazed he's only 13% rostered, but against Cincinnati, this is somebody that you definitely want to put in there this week. If he is out there, I would feel comfortable starting him. So this is the guy that, of all these players I've talked about, Darius Slayton is my number one player to start for this week. Gets a solid matchup. It's going to be needed. Had good involvement last week. He's an experienced wide receiver, has been around for a while, knows this offense. Yeah, this all just sets up very well for me. I think that Darius Slayton is going to be an excellent start for this week. Other guys to keep an eye out as well. Quentin Johnston, 27% rostered. Dropped in a lot of places because of his bye last week. He gets a tough matchup against Denver. Could draw Patrick Surtain. It's either going to be him or Ladd McConkey will face Surtain. So I'm not expecting a good game this week, but there's a case to be made that he's the number one wide receiver on this team. And I think it's worth stashing him and kind of seeing how this develops over time. Trey Tucker, I talked about him last week. The Devontae Adams trade rumor makes him an interesting target. He's still only 16.5% rostered. And then this player would have been much higher on my list, and this kind of goes for the whole Colts. I thought that Joe Flacco was going to start again, but it's looking like it's going to be Anthony Richardson now. And Adonai Mitchell was interesting to me because he had 7 targets last week, second-round pick this year. Maybe they could start to get him more involved. He's only 10% rostered. So in very deep leagues, I think it would be interesting to stash him and see how this develops over time. But he's still behind Pierce. He's still behind Josh Downs. He's still behind Pittman. The other thing is that Pittman looked like he was going to go on IR, but apparently he's not going to go on IR. So that's kind of another murky situation. Josh Downs also dealing with injuries. A lot of question marks on the Colts for this week. But Mitchell is somebody that is very talented, and it's worth keeping an eye on him to see how things develop over the next few weeks. Tight ends. All right, so going to cheat a little bit on this, but there's not a lot of great tight ends out there. If you're under 55% rostered, the guy to grab is Zach Ertz. 8 targets last week. Great offense. Pretty much as good of a safe play as you can get among the tight ends. He would be the guy that I would try to get if you're looking at guys under 55% rostered. Under 45% rostered, I would look at Tyler Conklin. Very similar situation, but the offense is not as good. But he has been a security blanket for Aaron Rodgers. Got 8 targets last week. He's also gotten 9 targets in some other games as well. He gets a solid matchup against Buffalo this week. So Tyler Conklin is somebody that is interesting for me among the guys less than 45% roster. But if we're looking at this criteria among players to stash for this week that are less than 40% rostered, Theo Johnston of the New York Giants. Again, that Cincinnati Bengals matchup, but you're looking at a guy who, when Neighbors was out, he had 5 receptions for 48 yards on 5 targets last week. He is a tight end that they drafted relatively high this year, and they are trying to get him involved in this offense. They have a clear void at tight end since Darren Waller retired. I think it's worth keeping an eye on this if you're in very deep leagues and you have a lot of roster spots. I'm talking like 18, 20 team leagues, because he's only 1% rostered in ESPN right now. But this is somebody to keep an eye on who could have a good involvement as the season goes along. He had, like I said, that would equate to 9.8 fantasy points last week, which is a lot better than a lot of other tight ends that went very high in drafts out there right now. So this is somebody in very deep leagues to keep an eye on who could be a sneaky option as the season develops. But my start for this week, if he's out there among the tight end position, is Cade Otton. Gets the 22nd ranked matchup against New Orleans. Cade Otton has been on this team for a minute. He has gotten good target involvement at times this season. 8 targets in week 3, 9 in week 4. Against Atlanta, he had 4 targets, which is down a little bit, but he's been at least he's had over 7 fantasy points for the past 3 weeks in the full PPR formats. And I think that there is a world where he has a good enough floor to just keep you afloat. And that's, in this tight end landscape in fantasy football, sometimes that's all you need. And I think that this is a solid option for you to play for this week. Cade Otton, there's a good hope is that he can get a touchdown. He's a solid red zone target that Baker Mayfield could look to. Mike Evans has got Marshawn Lattimore matched up against him this weekend, which has been a rough matchup for him at times, to say the least. So this could be an opportunity for Cade Otton to kind of sneak some targets away. I think this is a solid start. And then among flex players that I would start for this week, I'm going to go 2 receivers here. So first, my stash is going to be Dontavion Wicks. Very disappointing week 5. I thought that he would do a lot better than that, but he is getting targets, and that's the thing that I like about him that I would still stash him for. Wicks had 13 targets in week 4 in that game that he went off, which is excellent. He also turned that up. The next week he had 7 targets, but he did drop a lot of passes, and as a result had a pretty disappointing game. But he's 38% rostered, been dropped in a lot of places after his week 5 performance. I would still hold him if you can, because if he continues to out-target Jaden Reed, it's going to be very interesting moving forward. Because Reed is clearly the number 1 that I like on that offense among the receivers, but Wicks has an interesting case to be the number 2 guy, even ahead of Tucker Kraft, with the Watson injury, with the Romeo Doubs drama of him not practicing, whatever is going on there. I think there's a good case that Wicks could be a solid, sneaky bounce back candidate for this week, and could also be a solid number 2 receiver for this team moving forward. But I would not recommend playing him for this week because there's too much volatility in his performances right now. But if he gets a big target load again, and especially has a great game, we can start having a different conversation. Starts for this week in the flex position that I like, Jalen Tolbert. Jalen Tolbert is a guy that I've been talking about quite a bit on this channel. That is somebody that you want to have on your team. Keep an eye out among the players that you don't have to spend a lot of fab on. Tolbert finally broke out last week against who did they play again? Let me double check. Pittsburgh. He had 7 for 87 and 1. He has been getting a lot of targets on this team. He had 9 in week 2. He had 10 in week 5. So against Detroit, which is not a great pass defense, that's the book on them, is that they have a good run defense, but their pass defense is their Achilles heel. This could be a good opportunity for him to have a great game again. He does have a bye in week 7, though, so that's something to consider. But if you need a spot start for this week, I think that Jalen Tolbert is another great option that you could throw out there as well. All right, so now we are going to go to our fan mailbag questions. Thank you for all those who have commented on this channel. I do really appreciate everybody's comments and enjoy helping you guys win your fantasy football league. So thank you for everybody that does comment. And if you're new to this channel and you want to drop a comment in my videos, I will leave a pinned comment. If you comment in that, I will bring it up in the next fan mailbag, which will happen every Saturday. So first question is from Tay. He is asking me which running back to put in for his bye week for Kyron and Achan are both on bye. Guys that he's looking at is Eckler, Roschon Johnson, Tyler Algier, Pierce, Agumbawale, and Akers, all among the Texans. So among those guys, the way I would rank them is Eckler would be one if he plays. Even if Brian Robinson does play, I think Eckler will still give you a solid floor value that would be safe enough for you to play. But if Brian Robinson is out, then Eckler is easily number one. Probably moves up to being a top 20 running back on the week. But Austin Eckler, for sure, if he's still there, that's the guy that I would get. Roschon Johnson would be number two. He's in a very similar situation with Chicago as the number two running back. But I do like the Commanders' offense more right now, and I think that's a better play to go with Eckler, who's been a proven successful running back in the NFL for quite a while. And then Agumbawale would be third for me. But it's looking like right now Joe Mixon is going to play, so I don't really like that as much. But Agumbawale, if Mixon is out, I think that's another very good option that you can put in that will be a safe play for you. Algier, not quite there with him yet. He is good, and he does eat into a little bit of B. John Robinson's load, but Algier is kind of more of just like an early down pile pushing running back that to me doesn't really give you a lot of the upside of somebody like Agumbawale, for example, who can do more in the passing game and just a little more versatile. How I would rank them compared to the guys that I talked about, Eckler and Roschon Johnson to me would be above Antonio Gibson. My start for this week. Tracey, if you could get Tracey, I would prefer Tracey over Roschon personally, maybe not over Eckler. But those are just some guys among those people that I talked about today in comparison to this list you gave me, how I would rank them. So if you got those guys out there as well, please consider that too. But thank you for the question, Tay. Really appreciate it. Next, couple questions from Dylan. Dylan always asks very great questions. Really appreciate your support to the channel. So ranking rest of season and dynasty for a couple positions. He's going to do his running backs, ETN, Hubbard, and Jacobs. So I rate these guys both rest of season and dynasty the same. Jacobs is still number one to me. Best offense, best role. He's the oldest one of these guys, but I think in terms of success that I see in the future for these running backs, he's still number one. Josh Jacobs for Green Bay Packers. Travis Etienne is two. This has been a tough season for Etienne, but I'm not giving up on him. I do think he's a buy candidate, actually. He would be number two on this list for me, both in dynasty and rest of season. And then third for me would be Chuba Hubbard, Chuba Hubbard has been great. This is by no means saying I don't think he's going to be a good player or anything, but I still have him third because the Jonathan Brooks factor is interesting to see what happens there. Also, just the team in general, Carolina is not a great football team. And Hubbard seems to me like he's doing very well this season, but I'm just not sure what his role in the NFL is going to be moving forward. Because a lot of times with these running backs, they really hit on one team and then they go somewhere else and they just can't recapture the magic. I just worry about something like that for Chuba Hubbard. Maybe he's only on this team for another year. He goes somewhere else and doesn't work out. That's how I would rank them. I would go Jacobs 1, ETN 2, Hubbard 3 in terms of both rest season and dynasty. Now, among the receivers that you have, you have Myers, Sutton, and Dell. Rest of season, Myers is 1 to me because Devontae Adams is not on that team. I don't foresee him playing there again. Myers would be their number 1 receiver. Unless you want to consider Brock Bowers in that as well, then Myers would be number 2. But he's going to have a good season this year. I think he will give you solid flex play. Dell is 2. I do like Dell more over these next 4 weeks with Collins out, but when Collins comes back, Dell is clearly the third receiver there. And I think Myers just gives you more consistent upside. And then third for me would be Sutton, just because of the Broncos offense. They're a very defensive team. They're going to run the ball, control it. I just have a hard time seeing Sutton giving you the consistent number 1 wide receiver option. But he is the one on that team, which is encouraging, though. So in terms of dynasty, though, I would go Dell because of the talent, then Sutton because of the number one role on that team, then Myers because older guy, no idea what the Raiders are going to look like next season. No idea if Myers is even going to be there. So just a lot of question marks. He would be number 3rd for me on that list. So among his keepers now, this is looking at his whole roster. He's going to keep Brian Thomas Jr. and one other player as well, Puka, which are, those are the 2 guys that you do want to keep on that dynasty format. Among the rest of the guys, so Sam Laporta is included among all those other players that I mentioned earlier in terms of ranking them. So Josh Jacobs would be 1, or the 3rd player that you keep. Then number 2 to me would still be ETN, because ETN is very talented, and there's a world where he gets traded somewhere else and immediately becomes their number 1. He's still a very young running back who's entering his prime, going to be relevant at least for another 4 years. I would still have ETN next. T. Higgins is another receiver that's interesting, but I would still rank Laporta over Higgins personally, because Higgins is very talented, but to me, there's not a lot of tight ends out there like Sam Laporta. And I know that he has struggled this season relatively, but I do feel confident that he is going to have some better games moving forward. And Higgins, although he is a talented player, it's pretty easy relatively to find receivers that come in and can produce Higgins value, but you really don't have a lot of tight ends that have the upside potential right now that Sam Laporta does in just his 2nd season in a great offense. So I would still go Laporta over Higgins. So the guy that would miss the cut to me would be T. But the beauty of this is that you still have a little while to kind of figure this out as the season goes along. But I just personally feel like T. Higgins is good, but I don't know if he's going to be on the Bengals. He could go to some team that's just got a dreadful quarterback situation like Las Vegas next year, and his value tanks. I think that I would go Laporta personally, but I do understand the argument for T. Higgins here. Then it would be Hubbard, then it would be Dell, then it would be Sutton, then it would be Myers among the guys I would keep after that. Next question, buy low running backs. I still think Brian Robinson is a great buy low running back that you can get relatively cheap. Chase Brown is another one that I really like for Cincinnati. I think he's going to get more workload as the season goes along. And then Tracey I mentioned as well. Ty Chandler is another person. I didn't mention him in the running backs to stash, but this would be a good stash candidate too if you want to consider guys on their bye week that could come in week 7 and do great things, especially if Aaron Jones is going to be out. Chandler's talented. He just has Aaron Jones in front of him. So this is somebody to consider buying low on in deep leagues. Do I like Tracey or Singletary rest of the season? And as I've talked about, Tyrone Tracey to me would be the guy that I would prefer to have. And then ranking quarterbacks. This is a very interesting conversation. Sam Darnold, Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith, Anthony Richardson, Derek Carr, and Andy Dalton. How would I rank them? So rest of season, I think you have to go with Geno Smith, because a lot of these guys that I've mentioned here, it's just there's health question marks, there's team performance question marks, and there's other starters that could be brought in to the fold question marks. But Smith has the least amount of variables to me that I think I would go with him rest of season if you have to rank all these guys. Then I would go Darnold. I still like Smith over Darnold rest of season because Darnold he's had great success early in the season, but week 5, there's been too much of that through his career that I still feel like I don't really trust him. So I would still go Geno Smith over Sam Darnold. Then I would go Derek Carr. I do have a little more trust in Carr, but I don't know how long he's going to be out with his injury. And that definitely puts a damper on things. Then I would go Anthony Richardson for this season. Then Dalton, and then Trevor Lawrence. But in terms of dynasty, I would go Richardson 1. Then I would go Darnold. Then I would go Lawrence. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence, to me, I put him 6 for this season because, Doug Peterson, this team, just not Not a lot of great things going on there, but I do think there's a chance he turns things around still compared to these other guys. And a lot of this is just kind of based on longevity in the league and talent. But Lawrence would be 3, then it'd be Carr, then it'd be Smith, then it'd be Dalton, because I don't really know what opportunities Dalton is going to get after this season. So he would kind of fall to last on that list in terms of dynasty. Thank you, Dylan. Those are all great questions. Question from Michael. Who would you trade for Devon Achane? DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, Jonathan Brooks, Jonathan Taylor, or Jackson Smith-Njigba. So I'd be willing to trade all those guys for Achane except for Jonathan Taylor and DJ Moore. And yes, that includes DK because I talked about this. I think DK is an overrated fantasy player. He has some blow-up games where he goes off. Everybody loves him because he's some jack dude that's like 240 and somehow still runs a 4.4, but he is not a consistent fantasy football player. He gets shut down against elite cornerbacks. He has a lot of hype that I don't think relatively lives up to his value, so he would be a great trade candidate off of some excellent performances he's had this season. DJ Moore, though, I would keep because I think what we saw in week 5, we're going to see more of that as the season goes along. Brooks, I would trade him because, this Hubbard-Brooks situation is ambiguous. The team is also not good. So I think there's more hypothetical upside than potentially what you could get. I do think it's good to hold on to Brooks. There's a question later about this as well. But I just think that we have to kind of temper expectations that this is somebody that we can rely upon and more just into let's see what happens with him. And Jonathan Taylor, by no means do you want to trade him for Achane. Question from Blizzard. This is a dynasty question. Malik Neighbors trade. Would you trade Garrett Wilson, Travis Etienne, and Jameson Williams for Neighbors? That's a lot to give up for Malik Neighbors, but in his particular roster construction, he needs a receiver, and I think I would do this because I'm not sold on Garrett Wilson personally. Etienne, I like, but Jacksonville is a tough situation for me. Jameson Williams, another talented player, but very volume dependent. Malik Neighbors, on the other hand, is a guy that has, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, just elite target hog wide receiver volume. Sorry, it took me a little bit to come with the words there. But I think that Malik Neighbors has so much upside that I would probably make this deal. I know you're taking a risk by giving up as much as you are, but I would probably still do it because I think there's a good chance that Neighbors is going to be a reliable option for them for quite a while. And I think if you can, the most important thing to me in Dynasty and fantasy football in general is getting receivers that are clear number ones that every week are going to get 10 plus targets, turn it into 100 yards. That's the most valuable thing that you can have in fantasy to me is having a receiver that can do things like that. Question from Bothy. Would you trade Brian Thomas or Devonta Smith for Brian Thomas Jr.? Yes, I would do that because Brian Thomas Jr. to me has the potential to be elite number 1 on Jacksonville. Devonta Smith to me will always be number 2 at best in Philadelphia as long as A.J. Brown is healthy. And now Devonta Smith is injured and he's got A.J. Brown coming back. And Eagles offense is not as crisp in years past. I think I would go Brian Thomas here to go with the upside. Would you trade Kyle Pitts for Evan Ingram? And I've been talking about trading Kyle Pitts, but I would go for more than Evan Ingram because to me, Evan Ingram is kind of a mid tight end that we hope things will work where he gets a lot of volume from Trevor Lawrence, but he's been injured. He's the offense is struggling relatively. I think Brian Thomas is more of the guy to have on that team. So if you're going to get Brian Thomas, I would not also get Evan Ingram. I would put all my chips in the Brian Thomas basket among the pass catching receivers on this team and try to avoid Evan Ingram if possible. So to me, Pitts would be somebody to trade for somebody like a Cade, McBride, guys like that haven't really gotten off to amazing starts yet, but you could potentially snag away from them. or a flex like additional running back depth, for example. Question from Frank NCO. A couple trade questions here. So his first trade question was Breece Hall, Terry McLaurin for Gibbs and either Zay Flowers or Jalen Waddle. I would not do that. I'm in the camp that you want to buy Breece Hall personally because, with the coaching change, I think they're going to get the running backs more involved. They've got a good matchup this week, and then they've got a great fantasy playoff matchup that includes, I believe, the Colts and Tennessee, which is about as good as you can get. And remember, Breece Hall last year, he started slow, and then he just went bonkers second half of the season. Hopefully we see a trend like that. This guy is just way too talented to me. I think I do like Gibbs, but Gibbs, even though he is a very safe option, he gives you 15 to 20 fantasy points. I don't ever see a situation where Gibbs is going to give you potentially 40 fantasy points, which is something that Breece Hall can do. I also think that Zay Flowers and Waddle are significant downgrades from McLaurin, so I would keep what you have there. Another question was Amari and Kirk for Rachaad White, and I'm not a Kirk guy, so I think if you could flip him, that would be great. But Amari Cooper to get Rachaad White, who's got some running back handcuff issues with Bucky Irving. You probably want to shoot for more with that. He ended up trading McLaurin for Achane, and I think that's a good deal because you've got some solid receivers there that you can work with. And Achane is somebody that, keep in mind, when Tua was healthy, Achane was easily top 5 running back, especially in PPR, but just all the receptions that he gets, very electric player. So it's looking, all signs are pointing to Tua is going to come back this season. So I would shoot for the moon and go with Achane personally. Prezimp has some questions. Rico Dowdle or Jameson Williams for this week in the same game? I would go Dowdle. I think he's going to get a good volume. I know he's got a tough matchup with Detroit, but I think there's a better chance that Dowdle gets a touchdown. Jameson Williams is, if you want to go for upside, I would probably go Williams, but I think Dowdle is safer personally. I think there's a risk that you have of Jameson Williams having like one catch for 10 yards. I personally would not want to go there. Dowdle, though, I feel is going to get 15 plus touches in this game, probably get some receptions as well. I would probably go with Dowdle personally. And then Wicks or Adunze. I would go with Adunze for this week. He's got a good matchup against Jacksonville. And Caleb Williams starting to get more comfortable. I would go with Rome for this week. Wicks would not be a bad start, but I'd prefer Rome Odunze for this week. And then Brooks versus Nick Chubb. Who will have the better season? Who is a better player to hold on to? Good question. Both of them have difficult situations on their team right now with the quarterback play and just the overall talent on the roster. I lean a little bit. I've been thinking about this one. I lean a little bit more towards Nick Chubb just because of the pedigree, and Jerome Ford is kind of not really stepping up as the reliable running back on this team. So there's need to use Deonta Foreman, who's a known journeyman, more often. I think there's a good chance when Chubb comes back, even though he is coming back from injury, that they just rely on him, and he ends up getting like 20 touches a game. So I think that I would probably lean Chubb. Both of them are upside plays, but I would rather take the upside personally on the guy that has been an elite running back on this team for many years. Brooks is just kind of on a struggling team with Carolina, but he is a very good stash candidate as well. I can see a world where he does well. I just like Chubb's upside a little bit more than Jonathan Brooks personally for this season. You're talking long term, then definitely Brooks, but Chubb, I think, for this season could have a good second half. Drift Racer has a question. Would you trade, I believe it was DJ Moore and, sorry, one sec. DJ Moore and T. Higgins for Kenneth Walker and Deebo Samuel. Yes, I would trade them. Kenneth Walker, to me, is the best player in this deal. And Deebo, as you saw from this Thursday, he is always going to be involved with San Francisco's offense. I would go with this personally. I think T. Higgins is a pretty good sell candidate for this week because more often than not, he has games where he goes off and then he follows it up with pretty poor performances. So that's a pretty even trade, but if you do need a running back, I like the idea of getting Kenneth Walker on your team and pairing him with Deebo Samuel to give you some good depth at both positions. Question from Jason. How much fab would you spend on Devin Singletary? Concerned about the Tyrone Tracey working into his snap count touches during the game, and I'm kind of concerned about that as well. So for that reason, I wouldn't spend very much on Singletary, because you want to save your fab for somebody that has league-winning upside. And to me, Singletary does not do that. So I would spend maybe $1 if you need somebody to be a starter. But there's not a lot of situations where I really feel great about starting Singletary either. So I would personally, I think there's some better options out there for you personally. I like Singletary as somebody that you could start for this week going up against the Bengals, but among these other guys that I've mentioned here, among running backs with upside, I would prefer them. And I think those are guys, like if Jonathan Brooks is there, I'd rather have Brooks than Singletary personally. So yeah, just feel free to, if you have any other running backs you're looking at, just run it by me. But I think that there's limited upside for Devin Singletary the rest of the season. Question from Bot69. Who are Ramondre Stevenson trade targets? He's a guy that I've been saying to sell, and I still feel that way. So to me, just the guys I would rather have are just most starting running backs in better offenses personally. I would rather have David Montgomery. I would rather have Travis Etienne. I'd rather have James Conner. I would rather have Chuba Hubbard. I would rather have Chase Brown. And I know that's probably a bit of a hot take, but I would prefer Chase Brown because of the upside of him in that Cincinnati. I just think he's an explosive player that's going to eventually take over that number one running back role. Stevenson, to me, is going to be somebody that has some great games, but then he's going to follow it up with bad games. He's going to be very tough to rely upon. I personally think you should sell him for somebody that could be more consistent. He's basically the antithesis of a David Montgomery, who's just always going to give you at least 15 points. Nothing special, but you know what you're going to get. Whereas Stevenson has the potential to just kill you. And I personally would just not be in that business. Question from Jacob. Do you trade Darnell Mooney for Amari Cooper? So Mooney is another good sell candidate in a lot of situations, but for Amari Cooper, I would not recommend doing that. He has Jaden Reed and Nico Collins, so he needs somebody to fill in for Collins' absence for a little while. I would keep rolling with Mooney in that situation. There is a world where my prediction is that Amari Cooper is going to get traded to the Chiefs. I think that Devontae Adams is going to get traded with the Jets, so then Aaron Rodgers gets what he wants. Because it's the whole, if you didn't watch the McAfee video, like Aaron Rodgers just runs that team. It's just, it's obvious the dude's like, I don't know. It's just terrible. I can't wait until he retires, to be honest. I'm kind of tired of him. But I would hold on to Mooney because he's already giving you good performances. Amari Cooper is kind of like the Ramondre Stevenson of wide receivers where, you know, you think you're like, oh, he's done enough. I can put him in there now. And then, oh, he's just going to be 2 for 8. And, you know, he's probably going to get traded, but the deadline, I believe, now is like mid-November. They pushed it back, I believe. So if you're in a situation where you need somebody to fill in for Nico Collins this month, I would just go with Mooney. Personally, he's getting good target volume. Amari Cooper brings another variable that could give you some winning upside, but also, you know, maybe he doesn't get traded to the Chiefs. He gets traded to some team that already has a couple other receivers and it doesn't work out. Yeah, I would personally keep Darnell Mooney. But if you are going to trade him for somebody that's had some down weeks that could be like an AJ Brown who's been injured, I would rather have Brown, obviously. But or Nico, like on your own roster. Let's say you were trading for him, I would definitely do that. But I would try to hold Mooney if you're looking at somebody like Amari Cooper. Last question. Wesley, would you trade Chris Godwin for Joe Mixon? And this is a good example of Godwin has done well to start the season, but I'm still convinced he's the number 2 wide receiver on that team. I still believe that Mike Evans is the guy. And you're getting Joe Mixon, who has been injured, but when he did play, he had 30 carries in his first game, which is incredible. Yeah, if you need a running back, I would go with Joe Mixon in that situation. Godwin, generally to me, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but there's a reason why when you draft people at their ADP, certain players are taken where they are in the ADP, others fall. And it's because, we generally have a good opinion about these players, and there's been a lot of research done on why you take such like Breece Hall as a top 5 player. And although he's struggled and he's been the running back 16, it doesn't mean that guys like Chuba Hubbard are just better overall players rest of season than Breece Hall. It just means that he's started slow, but he's still a very talented player. So in this kind of situation, you think relative to the trade value of where you got them from. Joe Mixon was a 4th round pick generally. Chris Godwin was around an 8th round pick. You're getting Joe Mixon for an 8th round value because he's playing really well. And Joe Mixon has played well too. So in that situation, I do feel that it's better to get Joe Mixon. And I'm not saying this is not a hard and fast situation that you just use all the time, but if you think about just the value of these trades, you have to think about how these players are viewed in the consummate, not just from how they've done these first few games of the season, but how they've done historically and why they were taken where they were in drafts. So in this situation, I would go with Joe Mixon. I think he's a better upside player. I think Chris Godwin, though he's a good player and it'd be tough to lose him, the upside you can get with Mixon in a very good Texans team would be excellent to me. And in scarcity of running backs, I would make this deal. All right, so that's all that we've got for this video. If you have any last minute questions you want to run by before we get into week 6, shoot them in the comments below. I'll try to get to them as soon as possible. But if not, we'll see you Sunday night, early Monday for the week 7 preview. We'll recap week 6 and we'll talk guys that you can pick up for week 7, trade candidates, etc., just like we've been doing every week. So thanks for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.